Hello, and welcome back to the channel. Firstly, I would like to thank all of my subscribers for another fun year, and for all of my viewers and customers who have bought my Cybernet meters. They have been very popular. So popular, I have sold over 200 of them this year. It has taken most of my time to accomplish this, leaving not very much time to make videos, sadly, or repair CB radios. However, I have managed to do a little bit of both, so I hope you appreciate what I've managed to do, under the circumstances anyway. That wasn't why you tuned in. I'm sure most of you are settling down now and thinking about stopping work and putting your feet up for Christmas. And I thought I would just use this opportunity to tell you about an odd story that happened here about a year ago now. So if you like a good Christmas ghost story, settle in, pour a drink. This one is quite interesting. And although my voice and some of the images in this video are obviously generated by AI, the story is true and was typed up in a whole afternoon by me and has had zero AI assistance. The AI just reads it better than me. Last year, towards the back end of the year, in early December, I was very busy working on CB radio repairs. Some of you might know this, who have watched the channel, and one morning a box arrived in the post out of the blue. I wasn't expecting any radios to repair on this particular day, though. We had certainly not heard from anybody asking about a repair for a week or so. I walked downstairs and approached the front door, and there was a box sat there. So I took the box upstairs into the shack and opened it up. Inside the box I found an old rescue radio, a Cybernet ZX1. The first thing I noticed from taking this radio out of the box was just how cold the radio was. It was absolutely freezing cold to the touch, almost as if it had been delivered by a refrigerated van of some kind. Anyway, I didn't think any more of that and left the radio. A little while later, I returned to the shack and taking the rig back out of the box. It was still freezing cold in my hand, and as I was thinking about that, I sat it down on the table and out popped a little note with the radio. It was just underneath it. I hadn't noticed the note at the time, and on this it said, "Dear Paul, please find attached my late father-in-law's rescue radio. It doesn't transmit, and all I get on receive is just this strange white noise. There was a return address, and an email address, and a thanks, Terry. There's nothing on receive." Okay, so I thought, it sounds fairly straightforward. I've done a few of these before, so I sat the radio on the bench and proceeded to take it apart. Now, for many viewers who are new to the channel or a little bit younger, back in the 70s and 80s, these rescue radios were very popular. Before the dawn of mobile phones, people would use these radios to contact friends or breakdown companies if they broke down at the side of the road, and as such, they were very, very useful. You see, many people didn't really want a CB on show or with an antenna on the roof all the time, or have a rig on show in the car, and just wanted the convenience of contacting somebody should a problem arise when they were out in their vehicle. I get a lot of these sets in for a repair and tune-up, and some have seen a very hard life. They still seem to be very popular though, and I actually like them. And the Cybernet ZX1 is a very good radio. It's a very good example of these sets, and they really work well indeed. I took the set apart and found a few little issues with it. The reason it wasn't transmitting seemed to have been because of some water damage. At some point around the RF power transistor, I managed to repair that damage and get the thing to work on transmit, but receive it was never that great. On receive, I just couldn't get it right. It seemed to make an odd sound. I can't quite explain it, other than it sounded like a howling wind blowing. It sounded like a gale instead of the normal static you hear on a radio. So I carried on with the repair. Got it tuned as I could, and then, as I often do, I left it on soak test overnight. And for this, and because of it being a rescue radio, I switched the radio to channel 9, the emergency channel here in the UK, and set it there quiet with the squelch up full, and just left it powered on overnight. Anyway, during the night, I was awoken by the click of a door to hear my daughter coming out of her bedroom, as I'm a very light sleeper. If you watch the channel, you might know I've got a couple of kids. My daughter Natasha is now 11 years old, and she tapped on our bedroom door and said to me,
"Daddy, that radio in your room has woke me up. It's come on by itself and I can hear a voice and it's hissing."
This was very late at night. It was 2 a.m. in the morning, so I went into the Radio Shack and the set was indeed on and was hissing. I couldn't hear any voices, but what was strange was the squelch was still set to the maximum position, and static had broken over it, but it was a weird noise. Not your normal static sound, but more like a pulsating sound, like a gale or a strong wind blowing, as I've already said. That's all I could describe it as. So anyway, I thought, well, I couldn't hear any voices on it, but she was still adamant that she had heard talking on the radio. Peering through the blinds and looking outside, I noticed a decent layer of snow had started to fall, and wondering if someone might be in trouble on the channel. I sat and listened in the dim glow of the shack for a few minutes, but still heard nothing but this strange sound of wind blowing. After a few sleepy minutes, I turned the radio off, settled Natasha down, and went back to bed. Early the next morning, I had another look at the set, and it appeared it was working properly. The squelch functioned correctly, as did everything else. I looked outside as I was going to go out and do a few jobs, and I noticed a deep layer of snow. Now, we don't get much snow here where I live in the southern UK, but it was still coming down fairly heavily. So rather than go out, I decided to carry on with the final setup. After a bit of tinkering, I got it to the position again where I felt it was set up correctly, and I left it on soak. However, the same thing happened again at about 1 a.m. in the morning. This time, my daughter very quickly came into the bedroom and woke me with a very worried voice and said she thought she'd seen a man standing on the upstairs landing outside my shack. I jumped out of bed, fists clenched, rushed out of the bedroom into the shack, but I couldn't see anybody stood there. I couldn't see anyone around. I quickly checked the security cameras, and all of the doors were secure. I could see no evidence of an intruder, but she was adamant all the same. How had this happened again? The radio had again broken the squelch, and the radio was on, and it was hissing with the strange swishing sound, and it was still on Channel 9. So again, I listened for a voice for a few minutes, heard nothing, and turned the radio off. Natasha was now very scared, and she elaborated to me that she had again been awoken by a crackly voice on the radio, and had crept to her door and had seen in the dim light a shadow of a person walk into the radio room. She froze still on the spot. She's only a child, of course, and she at first thought it was me, so approached the shack and proceeded to push the door open, and in the dim light, this figure she had thought was me disappeared into the shelving units to left side of where I sit, and that's when she rushed in to see me. I assured her she must have been seeing things as I had been fast asleep, and I eventually managed to convince Natasha it was safe to go back to bed. Over the next few days, as I worked on other radios, Natasha wouldn't leave my shack door open. Every time she passed, she shut the door, because she was convinced that there was some kind of ghost in the room. Now, I don't really believe in anything supernatural or had ever experienced anything like that. I should have said that from the start of this story. However, she's a bit more impressionable, being a young kid. I had carried on working with another few sets. The snow at this point outside was about 3 to 4 inches deep, and I really couldn't go out anywhere. So again, I had another go at setting the squelch and receive, and left it to soak on another test overnight, this time without incident. The next afternoon, Natasha was going out to play in the snow with a friend. Later on, she rushed in to tell me this. It had gotten dark when she'd returned home, and there was still plenty of snow on the ground. As she approached the back entrance to the house where we park our car, she threw her hands up to her face in panic because she saw a person lying face down in the snow at the front of our car. She rushed over thinking it was me, that I'd collapsed, plugging in the electric car, and in absolute blind panic ran over, only to find that when she got to the gate by the garage there was nobody there. Nothing. There was no one lying in the snow. I again said she must be imagining things, I checked the CCTV footage and showed her that it was clear and that nobody was there, hoping to at least try and clear her mind so I can have a good night's sleep that evening. Even though I am a skeptic about the paranormal, I was starting to wonder if this thing was somehow triggering some kind of visions or memory or patterns or something. I don't fully understand. I don't know if it is because I was on edge because of this, but over the following week with the radio switched off, sat on the shelf, I started to hear noises, knocks, clunks, bangs, tapping in the house on the following nights. Now we live in a new build property, so new builds always move around a bit and settle. But the house is now 4 years old and we haven't heard any noises for the last few years. I decided I would return the radio to the customer, so I contacted Terry via the email address on the letter. And I explained that I was having this problem on receive, and with the squelch and that, although it was now transmitting, it had this annoying issue. I didn't mention anything about what Natasha had experienced or what had happened here. But being curious, I asked about the history of the radio. I said I could see there had been some water or moisture damage, and that he had mentioned in his letter that he had other radios he wanted me to look at, and I asked if they had any similar issues, and if he wanted me to look at any of them. I clicked send and switched off my computer. A day later, sat at my PC and the message bell pinged. I sipped a mouthful of coffee and opened the email from Terry, and a chill started to travel down my spine as the email unfolded in front of me. Terry started to explain that his father-in-law owned a number of these rescue radios right from back when they came out in the late 70s, early 80s and onwards, and he had stored them in the car to help safely travel to and from work across a very deserted part of the North Yorkshire moors on a 15-mile commute. In the winter, cars would often break down or get caught in snowdrifts driven by the high winds, and it was very perilous for anybody stuck on the moors in those conditions. So he had picked up the ZX1 and a few other rescue sets when the offers were good and rotated their use in the 2 different cars he used for commuting. Terry said by the early 90s his father-in-law was near to retirement and was still making the long commute across the moors, and that himself and his wife were worried particularly by the old cars he was using, and they had tried to convince him to get a mobile phone and not to rely on CB, as nobody was using CB anymore. However, he couldn't be convinced to use a mobile phone as he had previously experienced success using the rescue radios and didn't want the extra cost or modernity offered by such a device. He didn't want any part of the new technology and wanted to rely on his rescue radios should anything happen. Terry went on to explain that one winter's night in late January 1995, a few months shy of his retirement, his father-in-law had phoned his wife from work to say, although the weather was getting worse and it was starting to snow and blow a gale outside, he would still drive home and was trying to finish work early to beat the traffic. His wife reluctantly agreed only if her father called her when he arrived home, having failed to convince him to spend a few pounds to stop locally in a bed and breakfast motel for my American viewers. Terry said that both he and his wife were becoming increasingly worried about the incoming weather. The snow was dry and was being carried by the wind and was settling in large drifts in the town where both he and his father-in-law lived. They sat nervously by the phone, awaiting a call from the father-in-law, but the phone didn't ring. The clock ticked past 6, 7, 8, and by this time they were getting seriously worried. Knowing the route that he had took, they alerted the police. The police told them that the route over the moors was impassable and that it was blocked by heavy snowfall and that it would be a couple of days at least before a plough or a breakdown recovery vehicle could clear the route. Terry and his wife were very concerned, but could do nothing but wait. A couple of days later, 2 police officers appeared at Terry's front door, and with a sad sense of foreboding, Terry let them in the house. Terry's father-in-law, Peter, had sadly passed away. He was found at the front of his car, face down in the snow. The police think his car had skidded off the road and its wheels were stuck in a deep ditch full of snow, the police said. When they got to the car bonnet and the driver's door were both open, and the rescue radio was sat on top of the dashboard, still powered on, but dimly lit, and there was a silent hiss of static, barely audible over the howling wind blowing at the open door of the car. The officer said he picked the radio up and it was freezing cold, but he could see a red glow under the display on the radio. He wetted his finger and rubbed it across the screen to see the number 9 glowing in bright red on the front of the radio. The radio was connected to the car battery directly by crop clips. Peter had complained that the cigarette lighter socket in the car had packed up a few years back, but it wasn't a problem as he would connect the radio directly to the car battery if he needed to use it. The cold wind and sub-zero temps were sadly too much. Peter had managed to put the mag mount on the roof, but likely struggled to release the frozen hood catch. But he had managed to open it and had connected the radio, but had collapsed before he could even attempt to put a call out. Terry explained that after Peter's house had been cleared, he kept all of the rescue radios in a box in the loft and had only recently decided to get them looked at, and had got my details from one of his friends who is watching and is a regular customer of mine. Terry told me to keep the radio for spares or sell it on. I thought again about what Natasha had seen. The man laid in the snow by our car, the figure in my shack, the strange sound of wind in the static, the fact the radio was always cold even when it was switched on. We decided on balance to move the radio along. In the months after the winter snow had thawed, our house fell quiet. No more taps, knocks, or squeaks. And Natasha said she hadn't seen any figures or heard any sounds. A few weeks later, Terry contacted me via email and asked if I was interested in looking at any more radios for him. I politely declined. I've often wondered, when working on old, well-worn and well-loved radios, just how many voices have passed through them and what secrets they might tell if they could. Maybe now, after this little episode, maybe they hold something more, something we can only really experience when conditions allow. Remember that, next time and maybe over this Christmas break, when you are scouring the internet for another bargain, you may just get more than you bargained for. Thanks for watching right to the end. Travel safe and see you in the next year.
Stuck in the snow. Help, is anyone there? It's blowing a blizzard up here. Help. I'm stuck in the snow up on 2 bedroom hill. Can anybody help? My daughter's going to be out of her mind again. Help.